does something to your mental health. I developed PTSD, I was depressed, I had anxiety, but through all of that, I worked extremely hard because I knew why I was there. My values drove me, my principles drove me. And I think the moment where I had to make a decision about continuing my political career was not because of the attacks, but because of an issue of principle, where I had to decide whether or not I am willing to go back on my values and my principles in order to stay in politics. And it happened around Facebook.
Hey folks, this week I'm chatting with a billion-dollar mover who absolutely captivated me when I first met her, but for a change this time from the world of politics. Phumzile Van Damme is a former member of Parliament of South Africa, winning multiple awards for her work in counter-electoral disinformation, digital rights, and platform accountability focusing on Africa. Phumzile's first foray in the fight against disinformation centered on the rise and fall of the controversial global PR firm Bell Pottinger, who, if you recall, ran a race-based campaign to ignite the differences between the people of South Africa, digging into its painful history of apartheid. She presented the case on behalf of South Africa, and 2 weeks later, they shut shop, basically toppling one of the most powerful PR firms in the world. What does it take to be a young black woman in politics, to build influence and lead with your principles still intact? Her billion-dollar moves is one I needed to deconstruct that I thought all of us leaders could learn from. You don't want to miss it.
I think I last saw you at the Vital Voices Global Leadership Award, and was really inspiring to meet you, a fellow young woman, working hard to make a difference. I think it's important for all of us to support each other and be in constant conversation about, how we can go about being change makers.
Absolutely. And this is exactly why you're here, right? I wanted to, widen the aperture a little bit of our audience to hear a little bit about the work that you do. So let's start in true billion-dollar moves fashion. Give us a little bit of context, and we're going deep here. We're going raw, unfiltered, which I know you have no problems doing, Phumzile. I can count on you for that. But tell us, who is this wonderful woman who's sitting in front of us today?
Yeah, Phumzile Van Damme. I'm a South African. So for about the beginning of my professional career and for 12 years, I worked in politics in South Africa, starting out as a researcher and then becoming a member of parliament, so a representative in the Parliament of South Africa. I did that for quite a few years with a lot of challenges that come with being young, black, and being a woman. So I dealt with all of that. So while dealing with all of that, working extremely hard to kind of do justice to the position that I had as an MP in the opposition to bring about change. So my focus was always less on kind of problem identification. And I think that's sort of like a general life philosophy. I'm less interested in being able to just only identify the problems, but also find solutions. So because of that kind of frame of mind and philosophy that I had to my work, I was able to change policies, change laws, and kind of have a positive impact on governments, on laws and policies, and bringing about change.
Let me just frame this because you missed this point here, but you were the youngest MP in a parliament.
One of the youngest ones.
Okay, one of the youngest one at 31.
At
right?
31, which I think is quite a young age. I think also for your American audience, your North American audience, which is a fairly
Mm-hmm.
young age. Those kind of arenas are often older and male and very rigid. So I think there is kind of a group of very young MPs that bring like energy and new insights.
Yeah, and tell us a little bit about your journey there. I mean, I know you had this fire in you, right, from a very young age, and your mother eventually told you that she was actually proud of you eventually, although she did reprimand you earlier.
So I always tell the story that my kind of first activism, foray into activism, started in fifth grade. So our teacher, I don't remember why, had decided she was not going to allow us out on recess as a punishment. I obviously viewed this as completely unjust, and organized my fellow classmates. We wrote placards and we protested. And obviously, I got into huge trouble for that. Sent to the principal's office. My parents were called in. And on the drive home, I was frightened. I was like, I am in big trouble. I'm going to be grounded for a very long time. This is bad. And my parents didn't say anything. So for years, I don't know, later on it came up in conversation and I brought it up and my mom said I didn't say anything because I was actually incredibly proud of you for doing that. So because I have this innate personality trait or value in myself about being able to do what is right and standing up for what is right. I think that's kind of where I found myself in politics. I was initially going to be a lawyer, but I found it too rigid, formulaic. I remember I was studying civil procedure and I was like, well, this is just, there's not enough room for creativity. And then I ended up graduating with political science. This innate quest for justice is what drives me.
Having this vision of yourself, right?
Mm.
To see yourself as a woman in politics, and you started out, right, framing exactly who you are. You're a young black woman in South Africa that's struggling through a lot of issues still. How did you take that, vision of yourself to say that this journey is possible for me and I'm gonna work through it?
I came in bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. I was just, I'm going to go and do this. And I didn't think of kind of the systemic issues I had to deal with. I did not consider, being young or being black or being woman ever being kind of a hurdle. I thought, it's the parliament. We have a constitution in South Africa, kind of one of the most liberal constitutions in the world. And I didn't consider that this is kind of what things I'd have to grapple with. I always tell the story that the first kind of inkling that I had that this was going to be difficult, there was an older woman who I really, really admired from one of the other political parties. She used to be able to kind of stand at the podium and deliver the most amazing, knowledgeable speeches without a script. So I was really, really proud. And kind of my first speech in Parliament was a really big debate in the President's State of the Nation address. Then after I'd spoken, I went outside and I saw this woman with her husband. And the husband said to me, people don't really like progressive women. I used to wear red lipstick. I forgot I should have worn it today. He's like, you should stop wearing red lipstick. People don't like that sort of thing from women. And I was like, oh, all right, okay. And the reaction I had to that was, okay, so I'm going to have to deal with this. I'm going to have to work harder. And I'm going to have to deal with being heckled, with being shouted down, with being told I'm arrogant, being told that I need to speak less, that I'm really young, I should calm down, that I can't actually speak to other MPs because they're old enough to be my mother. So kind of overcoming that and being very clear about what it is I want to achieve, understanding that as hard as it is, even though I struggled, I made it easier for the young women who come behind me in this kind of arena, like those who came before me who made it easier. So that's kind of, I think, also what helped me navigate that.
Speaking of that, I mean, how did you map your journey? I mean, you started as an assistant, right? And then worked your way through. Did you already have a plan?
Yeah, when I started, I wasn't very clear about my goals. So I'd never really wanted to be a representative. I just enjoyed politics and kind of worked my way through the structures of the political party that I worked in. So starting kind of a researcher, media officer, to being a spokesperson at one of the governments, to being the head of the office that I started out at. So I initially didn't really consider public office. I consider myself an introvert. I was very kind of afraid of public speaking. But I think through the journey of being a staffer in politics, I saw the opportunity to, be in the arena myself. I guess where I had more of a strategy and a structure and a plan is around what I wanted to achieve, what strategies I was going to use. And what was important to me really at the beginning was to have a core set of values. What is important to me? What am I willing to do? What I'm not willing to do? So I've always said to people that as a human being, you need to be very, very clear about your values. You need to be clear about who you are, what you believe in. So when you're faced with difficult questions, you go back to those values and say, does this align with what I stand for? And I think that's also particularly important for people in business.
Hey folks, by now you know that Billion Dollar Moves is proud to be part of the HubSpot Podcast Network, the audio destination for business professionals, together with other amazing podcasts like Creator Science, hosted by my friend Jay Klaus, where he goes behind the scenes to explore how creators like James Clear to Cody Sanchez are making a living with their art and creativity, and how you can do the same. And a favorite episode is, of course, with my podcast crush, Guy Raz, the host of How I Built This, on what he's learned from great creators, the similarities he observes between high-performing artists and entrepreneurs, the role luck plays in success, and the trade-offs that come with having high ambition. Listen to Creator Science wherever you get your podcasts. So who you are and also who you are not, being super clear about that. I love that, absolutely. And of course, you chose the DA, the party of the Democratic Alliance, and also decided to speak a lot about the use of technology, political disinformation. I mean, you campaigned on quite a few things. Tell us a little bit about your big ticket items and what drove you.
So I was in the communications and digital technologies portfolio, which is kind of largely focused on the communication sector in South Africa. So the public broadcaster, media regulation, and that sort of thing. So my first task there was to reform the public broadcaster, which had kind of been captured by the ruling party and no longer independent. So that was kind of, I think, one of my biggest challenges and goals, was being able to reform that organization. And my foray into disinformation happened around 2017, so kind of after the Cambridge Analytica scandal. So there was a trove of documents released by a whistleblower who to this day is not known. So they released these documents around state capture by the then president of the ruling party, Jacob Zuma. And part of those documents released was contracts with a PR firm called Bell Pottinger. I mean, it was one of the biggest PR firms in the world, one that kind of operated in the shadows. They had I think a $500 billion contract with the Pentagon in Iraq. They worked with Augusto Pinochet. They were called Margaret Thatcher's best PR firm. So this was a really big organization with a big global footprint. And they'd been hired by a family linked to the president. And they'd run a disinformation campaign. So I think it was kind of the first major social media disinformation campaign in South Africa. And what they'd done was kind of manipulate race relations in South Africa, a country that had emerged from apartheid, and pitting South Africans' different racial groups against each other, as kind of finding the blame for why South Africa found itself in the situation it was in at the time. And I think in a very rare moment in South Africa, everyone, regardless of race, gender, South Africans united and were very angry. It was quite likely the first kind of pushback that Bell Pottinger had from a country. It was so bad that they, shut down their social media accounts. I think it's PR 101, never become the story yourself. So they became the story. So what I did, along with researchers that worked for the parliamentary operation, we kind of investigated ways to hold Bell Pottinger accountable. I went and presented the case at the PR sector industry body in the UK. And long story short, they lost all their clients and shut shop. So that was kind of my first foray into disinformation, and became a topic that I was really passionate about.
I mean, you were part of really a big movement to shut down the big man, right? In driving, as you said, they've been driving historical campaigns and have been known to be the one to call. Mm-hmm. Were you at any point afraid of being whatever, in danger? I mean, you hear of things like this, right? This sounds like a house of cards, essentially.
I wasn't afraid. I don't. For some reason, I should be more afraid, but I am not, because I am driven by those values and those principles, and those kind of, make me less afraid, I guess, fearless in taking on big bad guys, because it has to be done. Yeah.
Because it has to be done. And tell us a little bit. I mean, of course, we don't know the South Africa in the way that working through the ranks, and how big this issue was in really rousing the public. And what I've come to know through you actually is how aware and how strong the advocacy is actually among the young people, that people don't know that they care about the future that they're building in what they believe to be a South Africa that's possible. Can you tell us a little bit about the snapshot of, where South Africa is, post-apartheid, as you said, in our generation?
Yeah, I think South Africa finds itself in a very difficult situation. It has the highest youth unemployment rate in the world. So I think a lot of young people are disillusioned. They don't have hope. And they've sort of found ways to express themselves outside of politics, because they've lost faith in politics. So around sort of 2018, there was a spate of protests called Fees Must Fall, which was around access to tertiary education, which was incredibly expensive. And so young people started big protest movements, not seen since the advent of democracy. So that was a symptom of just how disillusioned young people were with South African politics, and not being able to kind of go to your representatives and express yourself and feel represented and feel that there will be change. So they've expressed themselves in that way, and today, I sense even greater disillusionment. I sense a lot of lack of hope. And, a lot of young people are on social media. And what I like, my life's work has become now, is allowing them that platform to share very freely what they believe. In countries in Africa where there's digital repression, where access to social media is limited, that they have the ability to freely share their opinions online without facing the risk of being arrested, of being targeted, and particularly also focusing on young women. The social media space has become one of cyberbullying, sexual harassment, doxing. So I'm really passionate about, one, allowing not only South African, African young people to use the platform that is social media to communicate, because it's the best way it's become the best communication platform to communicate to their governments, to say we are not happy with this. This is the change we'd like to see. So it's fighting for their digital rights, fighting for freedom of expression, fighting against disinformation, and how that kind of pollutes the information environment and they aren't accurately able to express how they feel.
We've heard a lot about political disinformation. I think that came to light with Cambridge Analytica, as you mentioned earlier, right? But give us a sense here. I mean, in countries outside of America, how does this look like? I mean, we've heard of China blocking so many sites, and recently I can't remember which country this was. Pakistan, actually, Wikipedia was down for a while, whether that was intentional by the government, and censorship, right, is a huge topic today, especially with governments really trying to get a hold of how do we control this? What does this new future look like, and how do we regulate? What are your thoughts on some of the key challenges that you're working through?
Yes, so I've kind of a part of the kind of greater global community focused on disinformation in all its forms, and my interest is particularly around elections, holding social media platforms accountable. So, them acting against hate speech, acting against disinformation. But what I've chosen to focus on as part of this global community is Africa. And the reason I've done that is that a lot of kind of the discussions are focused on the US and the EU, and the global South does not get enough attention. As an example, Ethiopia, a civil war rages, which is considered one of the most deadly in the world. And it's not getting the attention that it should. And that's a conflict that was fanned on social media through hate speech, through incitement of violence. I think Brazil was a more recent example, and one that gained attention, I guess, because of its proximity to North America. So I really want to focus on Africa, highlight electoral disinformation and what it does in those countries where there are so many, there's so much poverty and joblessness. So I want there to be an online environment that is not manipulated, where there's truth, where the discourse is not manipulated by political parties and by sort of PR firms that, after Bell Pottinger, have gone into the shadows to give themselves plausible deniability. So it's really making sure, one, doing the work that needs to be done on the ground, and setting up projects that go into those elections and set up the systems to monitor disinformation, advocate around policy and legislative reform, working with local organizations in order to not only kind of help them do the work, but also provide them with the resources and tools and skills to do this in the long term after the election has ended.
Because we're not experts in this, right? We're in the business community. What does this look like? I think the level that we would understand it with the reference of Cambridge Analytica is, fake accounts, bots that are driving certain campaigns, certain messaging, and yet control manipulation by different platforms. And of course, you're very active on Twitter. You've got a huge following. Is Elon the answer? What is the answer here in terms of, the management of these huge big tech platforms that are controlling so much of what you're working on?
I mean, I think they're a great value add to society in terms of the political space. One, voters have direct access to their representatives, and people are able to mobilize around specific issues. I mean, look at the Arab Spring. A whole kind of country was changed based on social media activism. So they're absolutely important. They have a great role to play in society. But in the same way that they allow that sort of mass media communication, there's a lot of harm that they cause. Election interference, as we saw with Russia and the US. And I think a lot of that is now focused in Africa. So there's a lot of Russian and Chinese disinformation kind of sponsored and resourced by the Russians. So the environment I'd like to see is one where freedom of expression thrives. I don't care what you believe in, share what you believe, as long as you cause no harm to anybody else. So that's like an online environment I'd like to see. No hate speech, no discrimination on the grounds of race, gender, whatever, where it's truly the public square, where you can say whatever you say, as long as you cause no harm to others. And I think social media platforms have a responsibility to make sure that their platforms are not used to fan civil wars, as we saw we see in Ethiopia, fan an insurrection, as we saw in January 6th in the US, and the same in Brazil. So they have that responsibility, and we need to hold them accountable.
And what does this look like when you say holding them accountable? Are you talking about regulation here? And I know there's no sort of silver bullet, right? But what does this look like? Is it, more resources allocated into monitoring? What is your suggestion to these big tech executives who, by the way, are struggling with layoffs, right? And it's a tough time right now.
Yeah, it is incredibly tough time. For the longest time, I was a great supporter of self-regulation. I believe media should self-regulate, and government should not regulate free speech. But I think from the harm that we've seen in Myanmar was a genocide found on social media. There's so many examples of where social media platforms have resulted in great societal harm. And now it's important that regulation is in place because they clearly won't do it themselves. We need laws in place that clearly define what sort of content shouldn't be online. And I think there's generally understood ideas of what constitutes freedom of speech. John Stuart Mill and the harm principle. So I think there's now space, one, for governments to regulate, but not regulate to shut down free speech, which is what we're seeing in some countries, where laws against disinformation are essentially laws to shut down freedom of speech, to silence dissent. So there's space for a regulatory model to be established. And I think the EU is the best example of, one, protecting personal data, one, forcing platforms to act against disinformation. So there's big conversations happening, I think, in governments and civil society of what needs to be done. And that work needs to be done all over the world. I think the EU is kind of the leader in Australia. And I know the US and other parts of the world are lagging behind.
I want to go back to your career here a little bit, because a lot of this drive that you're speaking to and the work that you've done has been part and parcel of each step of your career, right? You've taken a very interesting turn to double down into this topic that you started on as the shadow minister, essentially, in digital technology and all that. But you had not a great time. You resigned after some time, and there was news in the public domain that talked about a clique of people that really pushed you out in some way. And I can't imagine that was an easy time for you to decide to leave that platform as an MP, spending a significant amount of your time to then go on to do this. Can you talk to us a little bit about that piece and how you found yourself again, I suppose?
Yeah. Because I worked really hard to get results, and I guess building more of a public profile, a positive one, where the public could see that I was working hard and bringing about change. there was pushback from inside my party. And I never understood it. I didn't understand it in the beginning. Because it's like, what's your problem? I'm doing my job. I'm doing well for all of us. What's the problem? It was so bad that, there were coordinated attacks online, bot attacks. I'd get kind of a tweet every few seconds saying I'm arrogant, I'm this, I'm that. And I fought that. I decided clearly I have a greater impact than I believed I had. So through that negative time, I was able to kind of recognize my own worth. And I realized, oh, okay, clearly I'm some sort of threat. And I fought hard. I remember I used to say I'd pull out a knife from my chest and keep going because there was so many thrown at me. But I knew I was there and I had to do it. So for, I think, 2 years, it was a constant fight where, I believe everyone should go to therapy, where everyone should go, where I was in permanent fight or flight mode. And, that takes a toll on your general mental health. And my response is always fight, not flight. And that does something to your mental health. I developed PTSD, I was depressed, I had anxiety, but through all of that, I worked extremely hard because I knew why I was there. My values drove me, my principles drove me. And I think the moment where I had to make a decision about continuing my political career was not because of the attacks, but because of an issue of principle, where I had to decide whether or not I am willing to go back on my values and my principles in order to stay in politics. And it happened around Facebook. So I'd been able to kind of help the summoning of big tech giants, the South African parliament, which is incredibly difficult for other countries. It was a first in Africa. And then at the last minute, the 11th hour, Facebook said, they're postponing their appearance. And then I'd written a statement basically saying, this is not right. And my party basically told me I need to leave Facebook alone. Facebook's really great at what they're doing. They're really great at removing disinformation. So it was at that moment where I said, this far, no further. I am not going to compromise on those anchoring values that keep me going. And I said, bye.
Companies are under pressure right now. Pressure to get more leads, close deals faster, and get better insights to create the best experience for customers. A CRM can help, but not just any CRM. One that is easy to set up, intuitive to use, and customizable to the way that you do business. That's where HubSpot comes in. HubSpot CRM is easy for everyone to use on day one and helps teams be more productive. Drag and drop your way to attention-grabbing emails and landing pages, set up marketing automation to give every contact white glove treatment. Plus, AI-powered tools like Content Assistant means less time spent on tedious manual tasks and more time for what matters, your customers. HubSpot CRM has all the tools you need to wow prospects, lock in deals, and improve customer service response times. Get started for free today at HubSpot.com/billion-dollar-moves. Actually, the episode just before you, I was filming this with a founder that has a multi-billion company. She decided to, bring a new CEO on. And it's that question of when do you say enough is enough for you? And you talked about, your values being so important. But of course, I have many friends who are in politics that share with me in private conversations about how, because they chose this path, you have to work with the system to change the system.
Yeah.
And in some way, the critique could be of you that you couldn't stand the heat. You came in hot, guns blazing, and then now you're in Norway.
Yeah. You know what? I fought hard. I fought incredibly hard. At my personal expense. I became a lifeboat for so many because I decided this is no longer about me. I can fight these people. They know me. Throw a knife at me, I'll retaliate. Stop being about me. It was for other young MPs, young women, young representatives. I fought incredibly hard. But once again, whether or not I was willing to stay in that organization was centered on what I believe to be my values. And, you can't be in those situations for just being there. You need to know why you're there. And I think my resigning was actually a form of activism. It was saying that this is what's happening and this is not right. And we cannot do that, because I would have been forced to remain in a situation where we turned a blind eye to what social media platforms were doing. In fact, not even a month later, after I started this work, there was civil unrest in South Africa, billions of dollars of property destroyed, 300 people dead from social unrest fanned on social media. And if I'd stayed there, I would have been part of a system of turning a blind eye. And I think it was far more powerful for me to leave. And it took incredible strength, actually, to stand up for what is right. It would be much easier for me to say, okay, well, fine, I'll just turn a blind eye and continue to be in that position. But I chose the tougher, less traveled road.
As you seem to always do, right? that is the fighter in you since the 5th grade. Yeah. But will there be a time where you feel you might go back? I mean, you're very young, right? You started super early. Is there a possibility of a way back for Phumzile?
I don't know. People always say, oh, come back. But I've started a new mission in life, which I need to see through. I need to do this work. It's important. And I don't know if there's an end goal. I'm focused on those solutions, and I want to see those solutions in place. I think, like I said in the beginning, I know where all the problems are. Everyone knows where their problems are. So I'm dedicated for the short to medium term to do this work. And I don't know, maybe I'll be back. You never know what
life's be back. Maybe you never know, but
yeah,
maybe. But I do have this question, and this one was fed to me by a lot of my South African friends when I was doing my research. Do you think there will ever be a Black woman as a leader of the DA?
I thought you said of South Africa. Woo! The DA, a Black woman leader. I think, oh my God, this is a question I was not anticipating, that I haven't prepared for. So you'll get the most honest answer out of me.
That's what I'm here for.
Yeah. The DA used to be a great party. It was very kind of dedicated to uniting South Africans. It was a party where all different race groups felt at home. But it has kind of taken a right-wing drift, where it has imported a lot of kind of Trumpian strategies and language, which didn't align to what I believed in. And it's become a party that is kind of inching towards a small minority of voters that's targeted on winning white votes, and is less interested on uniting South Africa. What always happens in the DA is that there will be a Black person, Black woman, Black man that becomes leader, but then they're undermined as soon as they begin having their own thoughts in their own minds. Will the DA have a Black leader soon? I don't think so. I think they view Black as a little bit of incompetence, of being parachuted, of being made. That's the thing they always say to me. You never thank the DA for where you are now. I'm like, no, I worked hard. I did this work. It's not you. You didn't make me. So a lot of kind of prominent Black people in the DA have left. Anyone who grew a big public profile in the DA has left. And I know for those Black people in the leadership now in the DA are those that have shrunk themselves, who've compromised on values, who make themselves small.
This leads me to another question that I've been thinking about in recent years, right? As I share with my global friends about the history of even my the country that I was born in Malaysia, where the politics is so tied to race. Do you think we will ever have the conversation on politics without race that is purely based on ideology?
I would love that, and I think it's possible. But I think it's different for countries like Malaysia, South Africa, where systemic racism still exists, where misogyny exists. We are the generations that are still alive that need to do that work. I'm very idealistic. I'd love politics to be a contestation of ideas where we talk about, should we regulate social media platforms, should be self-regulation, where it's not centered around gender and going back on gender rights, as we're seeing in the US, where it's not focused on discrimination against the LGBTIQ community, where we are focused on human progress, where we are focused on debating the best ideas to take us forward as a species. I'm committed to that. I'm very idealistic in that we can achieve it. And we need to do that work. And if it's not us, this generation that achieves it, we do the work to make it easier for the generations that come after us.
Yeah, and of course, I should say that even, you mentioned Malaysia and South Africa, but of course, in America, it is so clear as daylight that systemic racism still exists, right? That we're still struggling through it.
It is so frightening what is happening in the US.
Yeah.
I think the whole world is watching in horror because it's absolutely, this country was a beacon of democracy and regressing. It's incredibly, incredibly frightening. And I think it's everyone's responsibility to make sure that human rights progress and don't regress.
And I think the freedom of speech is key to that, right? What I will say is I've always admired the fire that the Americans have. I mean, you turn on, all you have to do coming to this country is turn on Fox News, turn on CNN, you get opposing views. Memes are coming out, right? You could, and you would have an SNL skit about the president. You could never really have that in many other countries. And I think it is
that's absolutely right. Yeah.
This ability to fight with each other, right? To then come to a way forward is what I value.
No,
and I think
absolutely.
it gives me
politics should
optimism.
Be that a contestation of ideas. I don't agree with anything you say, but I'll protect your right to say it. As long as you cause me no harm, as long as you do not diminish my humanity.
And let's talk about, as a young Black woman who's lived through, so much that we've talked about, right? The targeting, the cyberbullying that has caused you PTSD. What is your message for, people who are tuning in that may say, I'm not the problem. I do my best in getting diversity and inclusion in my companies. What would your message be for them?
I find that when it comes to race relations, that it's become a wedge issue where people have such strong opinions and use pejoratives like wokes. What those things do is that they drive people further away from each other, and there's no understanding. What I would say for those people saying racism is not a problem, which is what's often said in South Africa, and I'm sure it's in the US as well. No racism exists. No police brutality exists. I would say to them, just listen. Listen to the people who experience racism. Listen to what they're saying. It's almost weird that people have to be taught that you need to empathize. You need to be able to put yourself in someone's shoes and understand what they are experiencing. You do not have to be Black to fight against racism. I think it's important for us just to take a step back and just see each other as human and understand that we all have very different lived experiences, and just taking the opportunity to listen to an employee who says she feels she's being discriminated against, instead of shutting that down and saying, well, that doesn't exist, and being defensive. just listen. Listen to what they're saying. And I think from those conversations, you will learn so much, not only about your organization, but yourself. And sometimes it isn't kind of deliberate. It's just inherent biases that we all have as human beings. And being able to recognize those biases, I think, makes us better people.
Yeah, and a question I have for you that I've been thinking about. One of the key things that has shaken the venture capital industry in the recent years was, of course, the Me Too movement, which has brought about, great light, but also at the same time, some pretty bad stuff, right? Fake claims that actually rattle certain men in power where it shouldn't have happened. I mean, I've seen this a couple of times that weakens the argument, of course, of the work that we do now. The sort of opposite effect is men. I will say men. I've had closed door conversations with very powerful men who are, working on capital allocations and all that. And they'll tell me, I want to mentor women. I want to sponsor women, but I will never take a meeting alone with her these days. And they joke about it, but it comes from something, right? What would you say to that?
In movements, there's always those people, right? And there's always those people that let down the team, do damage to those things. And I think part of the problem the US has is that, in particular, white men started feeling disenfranchised, whether true or not. It was an experience that they had. That was their lived experience. They felt like they didn't matter anymore. And as much as we can scoff at that, which I think sometimes we all do, it's important to be able to cross boundaries and go across those different aisles and understanding and not seeing those few people that do damage to such movements as being representative as a whole, of being able to see people as individuals.
And I'm hopeful that, our generation is the one where we talk about true diversity, right? That is not one against the other. So we've covered a lot of ground, and I've loved the rabbit holes that we've gone, and we could go on for hours, but this is the last question, and then we'll go to rapid fire, okay? Because you caught me there. I think if you're tuning in, if you're watching this on video on YouTube, I did have a little bit of a shock on my face when Phumzile did say she was an introvert, actually. Is this true?
I am such an introvert. My personality type, I never did this, like INFJ.
INFJ. Okay, this is Myers-Briggs. I love it.
Yeah.
You have me at Myers-Briggs.
yeah. I am true and true, thoroughly INFJ. Very kind of idealistic and focused on visions and implementing ideas. But my social battery is not very long. I am prone to burnout because I forget me in everything that I do. I just go until I'm completely burnt out. So I guess my internal work now is learning how to listen to the introvert and stop.
We have quite a few introverted leaders, especially in tech, interestingly, where they feel they have to force themselves and become this person. They say this to me, Sarah, it took me a lot of time to get to be this person you're looking at. What is your advice to introverted leaders? Could they be who they are and still succeed?
It's taken so much work for me. And that's why I'm saying therapy. I think every leader needs to go to therapy. There's no weakness in therapy. It helps you know yourself. And it's helped me in being able to accept that side of me, because I saw it as a flaw. I saw being an introvert as a flaw, and I saw it as something I need to overcome. I saw having anxiety as a flaw that I need to overcome. But I've actually realized that being an anxious person, being an overthinker, being introverted is actually my superpower. Because of that, I will be overly prepared. I will do all the research. I'll go to the worst possible outcome and prepare. So I'd say to introverted leaders, tap into those powers. Tap into the traits of being an introvert. Use those to your benefits. And I guess that's what a lot of people have done. And remember to rest. Remember to take care of yourself. Listen to your body. There's nothing wrong with resting because your social battery is done. So I think being
Yeah.
an introvert has its benefits, and learning to deal with extroverts.
And you're dealing with one now, so I am gonna give you the next quick chapter before we end here and use up all your
No, but
social
this is
battery.
fun.
I
I enjoy
I'm
having
glad.
conversations like this.
I'm glad.
They are fulfilling,
Hopefully it
they're not
charges it.
draining.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, good. So $1 billion questions is my rapid fire round. No deep thinking, just first thing that comes to mind, okay? All right, ready. First question. Money or power?
Money,
Fame or fortune?
fortune.
A moment you felt like giving up?
Every day.
What would you tell your younger self?
It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. Keep going.
Who's on your speed dial?
My husband.
When have you taken a stand on something and why?
I take stands on a daily basis. I'm not afraid to swim upstream.
I can confirm that. Just get on her Twitter.
I like making people uncomfortable.
A habit you've picked up that has changed your life significantly?
Finding a way to live comfortably with who I am and not learning to know that I'm okay the way I am. Learning to love myself.
And finally, what will your legacy be?
My legacy will be freedom.
And with that, I think that's a powerful, hair-raising moment to end. But Phumzile, this was a wonderful conversation. I so appreciate your time, your voice, and your extroversion of everything that matters despite your introversion.
Yeah.
And thank you for making $1 billion moves.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was a very fulfilling conversation.
And thanks so much for tuning in this week. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and follow our socials on Sarah Chen Global to get the latest on the show. It would really help me out too if you enjoyed this to rate and review our show on Apple Podcasts and share your favorite episodes with a friend. I'm Sarah Chen-Spellings and you've been listening to $1 Billion Moves.